So welcome everybody to this session on from Paris to Seville. Can you hear? Welcome to this session from Paris to Seville, assessing progress and looking at priorities in view of the FFD4. So I'm really delighted to be here with you. Apparently there is a problem with sound. People cannot hear.
I can hear.
So I'm delighted to be here with the EU Commissioner for International Partnerships, Jutta Urpilainen, and to start this session with a conversation with her. Now it's a time of renewal at the European Commission. There is currently hearings for the next commission that are taking place at the European Parliament. But it is also time to look back and take stock of what happened in the past 5 years. I think we will stick more to the last year. I believe, Commissioner, that when you took office 5 years ago, you would have not imagined that the world would be such a different place today. Perhaps you would have not suspected that the world would go through the deepest recession after the Great Depression, and that we would experience COVID and we would experience war in Europe. So this situation actually determined a surge in the global levels of debt. They determine a setback in the achievement of the SDGs and determined a significant rise in the SDG financing gap. And I think all of these reasons are also at the origin of why the Paris Pact for People and the Planet was created a year ago for a renewal of the international financial architecture. So that the international financial architecture can better anticipate and respond to shocks to the needs of developing countries, so that development and climate can be delivered as part of an integrated, unified agenda, and so that more representation is given to also developing and emerging countries. So I would like to thank you, Commissioner, for the engagement of the EU in the 4P, in the Paris Pact for People and the Planet, from the very start, for being a very engaged partner. This is very important for us, so thank you so much. And I would like to ask you, what is your assessment slightly one year after the creation of the 4P, the Paris Pact for People and the Planet? What is the progress that we made in the reform of the international financial system? And what do you see as main priorities going forward and the role that the EU can play in this? Thank you so much.
Merci beaucoup. Thank you very much. Thank you for inviting me, and thank you also for the excellent cooperation we have had over the years. Indeed, the last 5 years have been very exciting times, not only in positive terms because of the COVID-19, but also because of the Russia's aggression against Ukraine. But indeed, I also believe that we have achieved a lot, and progress has been made. And as you said in your introduction, I think we all agree that our international financial architecture must do better, as in its current state, it cannot effectively address global challenges. And the European Union has actively engaged in this process, and we will continue to contribute constructively to deliver impact and also scale for our partner countries. Maybe a couple of points which I would like to mention. The first one is that we must advance on the reform of multilateral development banks. And when I attended the annual meetings in Washington in October, I saw the progress of the World Bank's evolution roadmap, and I want to commend them for it. I think the World Bank and also the IMF are showing the way for all other MDBs who are also embarking in their own reforms. But more importantly, there is a tangible progress in cooperation and collaboration among MDBs. This is something new. And I think this is the path we have to definitely follow. But much work remains, including to fully implement the G20 capital adequacy framework roadmap, make the most efficient use of concessional finance, improve coordination and collaboration between MDBs and with other international partners, and also, what is important, to mobilize private finance. And an ambitious and robust IDA 21st replenishment will be crucial to reach our objectives. And I have to say, after I have consulted many of our member states, that I am quite optimistic, given early pledges already made by a number of EU member states. So the MDB reform is the first point. The second point is indeed debt. As you said, debt risks in low and middle income countries remain high. And high interest payments continue to constrain investments needed to reach the SDGs. And recent cases under the G20 Common Framework for Debt Treatments show, from my perspective, that multilateralism works, and we need to continue drawing lessons from ongoing cases with the aim to develop clear guidelines to help borrowing countries navigate the process. I think these processes are still very, very slow if you look at Zambia and some other countries, so we need to be able to speed up. And we also need more multilateral cooperation and coordination of debt treatment, including for middle income countries. Finally, I want to underline that a reform of international institutions and debt relief instruments are not enough. We need them, but they are not enough. So the substantial increase of investments required to address development needs and global challenges should also be accompanied by transparency, accountability, and effective structural reforms in our partner countries. So our partner countries, I know it's difficult. I know that from my own experience as a former finance minister, it's very difficult to make and implement structural reforms, but they are very much needed in our partner countries, also there. So public sector reforms by partner countries, including in public financial management, fair and efficient taxation, good governance, and on business environment, those reforms are essential to achieve sustainable finance for development, efficient public service delivery, and conducive investment climate. So it means capacity building support to partner countries to improve domestic revenue mobilization, as well as efficient allocation and the use of public resources. And actually that brings me to one of the biggest achievements of my time as a commissioner, which is the Global Gateway Investment Strategy. So we understood that we have to use the ODA funding in a new way, more efficient way. We have to be able to mobilize more investment. How can we do that? We use ODA funding in order to leverage private investments, and this is what we do through the Global Gateway Investment Strategy. We set, in the end of 2021, we set a target of 300 billion euros worth of investments by 2027. Now, after less than 3 years, 179 billion euro worth of investments have been mobilized. and investments focusing on energy sector, transport, digital sectors, as well as human development kind of projects like education, health, and research. So one of my African friends told me that, Jutta, we are moving into a post-ODA era. I don't know if that's the reality, but you know, in any case, I think it's important that we discuss also how the ODA money is used and how we can use that in order to leverage private investment. So for us, we give guarantees from the EU budget to our national development banks, including the French, so that they can then, you know, finance private investments in our partner countries. So mobilize investments through which we can support their economic growth and create new jobs for young people. This is very much of the core of the Global Gateway, and I think this is definitely the path to be followed. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Commissioner. It was fantastic to hear from you and to have this amazing start of our conversation. Thank you so much for all the work that you have done at the Commission, and all the best for the future. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
I would like now to invite our distinguished speakers to join me on stage. So we have an incredible panel of speakers. I would like to invite them to join me on the stage. We have Tani Mohamed Solihi, the Minister of State for Francophonie, the Francophonie and International Partnerships of France. We have the Minister. Oh, sorry. We have the Minister, very nice to meet you, Minister. Minister Gilberto Murillo Urrutia, Minister of Foreign Affairs of the Republic of Colombia. We have Diego Martinez Bello, Secretary of State of Foreign and Global Affairs of Spain. Patrick Ashi, Special Advisor for the 8th anniversary of the Bretton Woods, and also former Prime Minister of Côte d'Ivoire. Alexia Latortue, Assistant Secretary of the International Trade and Development Department of the Treasury of the United States. Very good to have you with us. And Mary Beth Goodman, Deputy Secretary General of the OECD. So you can see that we have a really incredible panel of speakers with us. I'm absolutely delighted to be joined by such an incredible panel of speakers. And in a way, we will now have an opportunity to continue the discussion that we have started with the Commissioner and go more into the details of some of the aspects that have been mentioned. So we have two main objectives for this session. It is very much for us a moment to take stock. So as you heard last year in June, the French President Macron called a summit on for a new Global Financing Pact. This was really the start of the 4P, the Paris Pact for People and the Planet, which is now a groundbreaking alliance gathering 68 countries. Last year at the Paris Peace Forum, the announcement was made that also a Secretariat for the 4P will be established to really ensure the follow-up and the implementation of the 4P agenda. And this Secretariat, which I'm delighted to be heading, is hosted at the OECD as an independent entity. We have a number of coalitions that have been formed and that are working. So this is a very concrete and tangible way through which the 4P is providing a flexible platform for countries to come together and work together, develop positive agendas of change, and develop proposals and concrete ideas on issues ranging from debt to private finance mobilization to international taxation and others. we have developed a little stock take at the 4P, and some of you perhaps have a copy with you, where we assess how much progress did we make since last year. And there are some positive news. For instance, on climate finance, the 100 billion target was met. Now we're starting very important negotiations this week in Baku on what will be the next target. We have made also some progress on governance with a 25th seat for Saharan Africa at the IMF. We have made progress on SDR rechanneling, but much remains to be done. And I think that Seville, so the fourth international conference on financing for sustainable development, really provides us a key opportunity to come together as the 4P community and contribute to a significant contribution and outcome in Seville. The 4P has also been working together for a contribution to inform the elements paper of the FFD4. And this has been done through consultations with all the 4P countries and the 4P coalitions and other thinkers. And I would just like to highlight four main transformational areas that we have identified in that FFD4 contribution at the 4P. One is definitely governance. I think it's really historic what has been achieved through Brazil's leadership at the G20 with the call for the adoption of a call for the reform of international governance. And this is something that really needs to be built on, and work needs to continue on the area of governance to make sure that better representation is given to developing and emerging countries. Another area is public finance. We have heard about international taxation. There is a 4P coalition, which is the Global Solidarity Levies Task Force, and there will be a discussion on international taxation right after this panel. So if you're interested, I would encourage you to stay and listen to that conversation also. And we have also been hearing about the need to have a new narrative around public finance. This is a very critical point. And we heard about also from the commissioner about the need to work more closely together, and the public development banks and the finance in common, I think they're also doing great work that we can build on to continue in that direction. Thirdly, on private finance, so the 4P has been working on issues around the cost of capital, because these really remain significant issues for many developing countries, not just the amount of debt, but also how expensive debt is for countries. So we are arguing for a review of the prudential regulatory barriers that are impeding investments, greater investments in developing countries. And we have also, through the 4P Leaders Group in September, we have launched a call to have a roadmap and an inclusive dialogue with credit rating agencies to enhance the transparency and the accuracy of credit ratings to make sure that perceived and real investment risks are aligned. And fourthly, an area that we also highlighted is the area of vulnerabilities. How do we better tackle climate and other vulnerabilities and reflect that into allocations? So these are some of the transformational areas that we have identified at the 4P, and I think now we have a fantastic opportunity to hear a little bit more from our speakers around some of these specific areas, and also what is their priorities as we approach Seville. How can we work together as a 4P community to deliver an ambitious outcome in Seville? So I would like to start from the Secretary of State of France, because France was really at the origin of the 4P, of the Paris Pact for People and the Planet. So perhaps we can take a step back and hear from the State Secretary, what is it that motivated the creation of the 4P? Why do we need something like the 4P? And what is your assessment of where we stand now, and what are the main priorities priorities going forward. And I apologize, I asked the question in French. I had told myself I would ask it in English. I told myself I would ask it in French. But just for you to know, the panel will speak a little bit in English and a little bit in French, so make sure that you can tap into translation if you need to. So, Secretary of State, it's my pleasure to invite your intervention now. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mesdames et messieurs,
ladies and gentlemen, first and foremost, I'm very happy to be with you today to discuss this crucial issue for the future and the legitimacy of our multilateral system. This year, we're celebrating the 80th anniversary of Bretton Woods, and that anniversary demonstrates that the international system allowed us to rebuild countries devastated by war, to lift hundreds of millions of people out of poverty in Europe after the Second World War, and to establish a common set of rules. 80 years on, three things are true. First of all, the system no longer reflects geopolitical and geographical realities. It no longer helps us respond to challenges that face us all: climate change, the collapse of biodiversity, and the specter of future pandemics. Third, it has not helped solve issues such as food insecurity, migrants fleeing war, and poverty on a global scale. And so, we believe the Bretton Woods system needs to be rethought. We need an international financial architecture that's fit for the 21st century, based on cooperation, solidarity, and ambition, which needs to guide our action. And that was at the heart of President Macron's idea last year at the Palais Brongniart. The international community came together to create the basis for this new financial pact. And that gave way to the Paris Pact for People and Planet, which is supported by close to 70 partners today from all around the world at all development levels. And that pact sets a clear goal: finding innovative ideas to help our financial resources grow in order to meet our ambitions for sustainable development, climate, and to preserve biodiversity.
These have played a catalyst role to reform the architecture of international finance as we know it. I'm going to give you 4 examples: the mobilization of special drawing rights of the IMF for those who need it most, with the target being overshot by $100 billion as set in the G20, a personal approach of debt handling, with the example of Zambia, the pursuit of the reform of multilateral development banks so that we can create more space for funding, and for answering in a coherent way facing the double challenge of poverty and the protection of our planet. Fourth example, a better integration of climate vulnerability in sustainable analyses of the IMF and the World Bank, who would allow our partner countries to do fair and sustainable choices and would prevent them from investing in obsolete programs or programs that are incompatible with climate change. As we said so in New York during the UN General Assembly, we must collectively continue these efforts. The 4th conference for the funding of development in Seville in July, and then we'll repeat it at the COP30 in Belém. This gives us a horizon for progress. There are many priority projects. First of all, countries that are facing high borrowing costs and who have a high burden of debt need to be helped. We need new debt devices, especially with regards to climate catastrophes. We must intensify our efforts to mobilize special drawing rights of the IMF. Since the Paris summit, we have gone above and beyond, but there's still so much to do. Making the SDRs available for development banks is a right that France sustains. The African Development Bank and the Inter-American Development Bank have made interesting proposals in this regard. We call upon all of our partners that are capable of doing so to join this effort in order to make it a deliverable for the Seville conference. This renewed architecture will only be inclusive and fair if everyone can have a voice. In that regard, we applaud the creation of a 25th chair for Sub-Saharan Africa at the IMF and the resolution of the governors of the World Bank for better gender equality within the board. France fully supports these evolutions. All the partners that are ready to take more responsibilities must be welcome at the table, and we must have a collaborative approach in order to advance. Political topics must no longer hinder global progress. We must restore confidence between advanced economies and developing countries. I am convinced that this will require a multilateral representative system founded upon rules and ambitions which have to be capable of facing the challenges of our century. We have to overcome. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Secretary of State. Thank you for your intervention.
On the need to rebuild trust and to be united, I think it's really important. I'm now delighted to turn to the Minister Murillo from Colombia. So Colombia is also a founding member of the Paris Pact for People and the Planet. It is a very engaged member of the 4P, and especially Colombia has shown a lot of leadership in on debt issues. So Colombia, together with France and Germany and Kenya, is spearheading one of the 4P coalitions, which is the Global Expert Review on Debt, Climate and Nature. So I would like to hear from you a little bit about what is how do you see that the work of the, first of all, actually, do you agree with the assessment from the Secretary of State in terms of the progress we made in the last year? And also, how do you see that we can make progress, especially on that issues, through the coalition and through the 4P and the head up to Seville? Thank you so much. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. I'm very delighted to be here with this very distinguished panel, talking about the issues that really matter. And very honored to be, for the first time, in the Paris Peace Forum, because in Colombia, we talk about peace and about war. We need to find solutions to the war. That's the main challenge that we have, to have funding available to respond to the real challenges that we have as humanity, which is, obviously, that we are in the middle not of a crisis, the climate crisis, but a climate emergency. Let me give you one example. And we don't have money to respond to that. All of you know that. I agree with you. But we need to move in a faster way. The pace is not the right one because people are dying and the humanity is at risk. Let me tell you this. One concrete example of today. President Petro, who is leader on looking for new ways of funding the response to the real challenges of the world, was supposed to be in Baku today. You know what happened? Colombia is under huge flood. The entire country. He declared national catastrophe yesterday. And you know what? We don't have funding to respond to the catastrophe because we need just to finish responding to the disaster, natural disaster in Colombia, created by the climate crisis. We need just to finish the year. We need $250 million that we don't have in our budget. And Colombia is one of the countries that have one of the most ambitious climate change, mitigation, and adaptation plan. And you know what? Countries that make that decision are punished by the international financial system. There is not incentive to access to funding to implement ambitious plan. So we need to have sincere conversation about that. One is debt sustainability. The framework for debt sustainability is not the right one because it's not supporting countries to respond to the climate crisis that we didn't create. That was the global north. So there is a matter of financial and economic justice. The funding are there. We need to challenge to those countries in a serious way. But we have progress. In the 4P that we were founders of the 4P, President Petro has been leader of that with President Macron. There is a group of countries, Colombia, France, Kenya, and Germany, that created a group of experts that they said, we have a vicious circle of debt sustainability. We need to have a virtuous circle that really support those countries. And there is some concrete recommendations. They already released a report, preliminary report, that was presented last year, by the way, this year in April, in Washington. Now they presenting an updated preliminary report in COP16 on biodiversity in Cali. There are some concrete recommendations that we need to take and to implement them. Those recommendations require, as you said, Minister, some deep changes in the global governance in general, based on the Pact for the Future. Secondly, we need deep, very deep transformation of the international financial system to create fiscal space for those countries to respond to the crisis. And you know what? We need to give more independence, more autonomy to those countries, because now everyone is in crisis. Let's say this. Recently, we have a lot of flooding situations in Eastern Europe. At the same time, now we have in Western Europe, in Spain, in Valencia. We were helping Colombians in Valencia to respond to that crisis, and yesterday we have the crisis in Colombia, our own country. So everybody's busy responding to the crisis, so you need to have those funding available. My invitation is to read that preliminary report, to implement the report, and it's not just about debt sustainability in a new framework, in a new paradigm. It's about also using, as you said, Minister, the SDRs, because we need fresh funding that you have the possibility to make those funding from the global north available from the global south. So that's my recommendation. I'm very glad that we are talking about these issues here. And Colombia is ready to continue implementing an ambitious plan for adaptation, mitigation in terms of climate change, but also we ask you to take a very responsible behavior in terms of supporting countries in putting funding on the loss and damage fund that was created in the last COP, because there is the need to have some kind of, I will repeat that, some kind of economic, social, and climate justice for the countries that are suffering this crisis. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Minister. Thank you for talking about climate justice, for highlighting some very concrete challenges that countries are facing in the world to fund their climate resilience strategies, but also the increasingly devastating shocks that they're under. And thank you for talking about the interrelated challenges of debt, climate, and nature, and how we need to find solutions to break this vicious circle. We at the 4P stand ready to continue to be working very closely together, and we really hope that we can bring more countries from the 4P and also beyond on board to really endorse the recommendations of the Global Expert Review on Debt, Climate and Nature. Thank you so much. I would like now to turn to Spain. Secretary of State, thank you so much for the leadership of Spain in the head-up to Sevilla. Thank you for your very active and engaged role in the 4P. You're also founding member of the 4P. So can you tell us a little bit more about the ambition that Spain and the opportunities that Spain sees for Sevilla? How can we work together in the lead up to Sevilla? And also Spain, in a way, very aligned to what has been mentioned by some speakers, has been discussing lately about the need for a new financing paradigm. Can you tell us a little bit more about what it is and how we can deliver on that? Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, first of all. And I'm very happy to be here. Since I've lived in France for 8 years, I will speak in French now. And so, as you mentioned, comme vous avez mentionné, nous avons
As you mentioned, we have organized the fourth conference next year. This is a manifestation of the commitment of Spain for development and for a dialogue between the different members of the international community. I am not a fan of the global north or south, but it's clear that there are different points of view which we need to bring together because we are facing existential challenges in terms of climate, for instance, but there's also the issue of funding. The conference will happen next year in Seville. And then there's the Addis Ababa agenda, and we've seen that we were hoping for a rather more positive situation after 10 years. We're far from our goals. There are areas where we've made progress, but there's also areas where we've not progressed at all. And with COVID, in some areas we've actually fallen behind in certain geographical regions and in certain categories as well. So that's something we need to look at together. We're looking at financing. It's a huge gap. It's 4 trillion we're talking about, which is inconceivable. And what's a little bit worrisome is that we have the financial means globally available to answer these issues. If we're not doing it, it's because we have an issue of political will, maybe also an issue of a process. I agree with a lot of the questions our previous speakers have highlighted. Concerning the conference, well, as the host, of course, we will have a role as a facilitator. There are members of the Bureau who are working on preliminary documents. I worked on the preparation conference in Addis Ababa in July. Based on a few milestones next year in Europe, we'll be able to finalize the structure of the conference. I believe that the areas we need to work on are clear. You've mentioned them yourself. First of all, the reform of the multilateral financial system. This is critical, and the French colleague has said clearly we're 80 years away from Bretton Woods, and the world has changed a lot in the last 80 years and the last 20 years as well. And the situation is almost the same in terms of composition. It's better to have a new seat for Africa, but it's still very insufficient. On special drawing rights in 2021, we had new drawing rights, and Spain unlocked 1.5 billion for the Resilience Fund, and it's nice to see other countries doing the same. In 2021, we had a historic drawing of special drawing rights, and unfortunately, after COVID, only 5% went to Africa, which shows that we have structural issues which we need to solve. There's also, this won't be a solution, but we have to remember development aid. Last year, we've approved a new law which sets the goal of 0.7 as a legal goal for development funding. This allows us to do the work where private funding will not be there because there's not enough profitability. Finally, let's talk about private funding. We have large financing flows that are moving worldwide to such a point that the people who are managing these funds do not know where to invest. There's a problem with the increase of the price of real estate in France and Spain, everywhere worldwide. And so we have to find the proper framework to make sure that this financing is going to go to the right countries. The fiscal resources are crucial, but there are two faces to that coin. On the one hand, there's internal resources, and there are countries with difficult development problems, and their internal rates of return are some of the lowest in the world. Those are administration problems. It's a reflection of the diversity of problems, but there's also a problem of political will. And if we manage to mobilize both internal and external resources, we'll get closer to the results we're aiming for. It's also linked to the matter of fiscal competition on an international level. We can't have countries that are trying to meet these challenges and to see their fiscal base erode in favor of third-party countries. We also have to talk about lowering the burden of debt. I was saying here to the colleagues that while reading to prepare, I wasn't aware of the issue of debt and the burden of debt. There are more than 3 billion people who live in countries who spend more money on debt than on education and health, and that's frankly unacceptable. So this is something we need to work on. And finally, we're talking on a political level. And I think that the matter of financing is going to come back naturally. There's technical issues, abstract issues, statistical issues. But the consequences of the decisions, which seems abstract, technical, or statistical, have very real consequences on the lives of people in developing countries. Every year we spend mobilizing these resources. This has an impact on people who are living under terrible and unacceptable conditions. And I think I don't see a feeling of urgency. It's our role to create this feeling of urgency. Apart from the technical results, this conference must aim to create this feeling of urgency and also connect the political and technical level. Because otherwise, the people who are taking the decisions, who are politicians, they must see something who is politically understandable and politically feasible. And I think that this feeling of urgency and this connection is what will allow us to reach the results we are aiming for, and this is the line that Spain is aiming to work for in the months to come.
Also some of the key elements that Seville will need to focus on. Also for reminding us that this is a very urgent agenda, and so if Sevilla can really deliver that message of urgency and help to deliver on this very ambitious agenda, this is really what we need. And I think we do have also an opportunity working together with the 4P really to connect that technical and political level as you were mentioning before. Let me now turn to my right here to the former Prime Minister of Côte d'Ivoire, Monsieur Patrick Hachi. Vous êtes maintenant, je vais parler en français, vous êtes en fait aussi en train de contribuer à un rapport pour étudier la vision qu'on peut avoir, comment en fait la Banque mondiale, le Fonds monétaire international devra être
International Monetary Fund, how they should be 25 years from now. And this is a very important thought process in the framework of the reform of multilateral world banks that we've said a lot about so far.
So
I would like to ask you, Mr. Hachi, could you say a little bit more about this exercise and say a few words about what you think about the future challenges that the multilateral system has to begin preparing for? Thank you. The interpreter apologizes. He's not using a microphone. Interpretation is impossible if he doesn't use a microphone.
Merci.
Thank you.
Merci d'avoir bien voulu
Thank
m'inviter
you
à cet
for having invited me
événement.
to this important event.
Vous avez planté le décor. Il s'agit de la réforme des institutions.
You've given the context. This is a reform of the Bretton Woods institutions.
donc créé en 1944.
So Bretton Woods was set up in 1944 in New Hampshire with 44 countries. It was quite hegemonic at the time. So under leadership of the United States, and 80 years later, this is the anniversary of the Bretton Woods institutions. Over time, these institutions have adapted to changes in the environment, and little by little have changed to be able to meet the needs of shareholders and beneficiary countries. And all of the challenges in the world have changed and are constantly changing, and it's extremely complex and it's accelerating. And we need not only to think about reforms today, but also to try to see where the world is going in the 20-25 years ahead, depending on the major challenges and major stakes, and perhaps starting to think about the reforms that we will need to meet these stakes 25 years from now. Because very often, to be able to act in a timely manner to crises and unforeseen situations, it's important to have a very solid and agile organization, and you have to be able to anticipate. So our challenge is to say, where is the world going in the next 20-25 years? And the second thing is to say, what are the reforms at organizational level that have to be undertaken by the World Bank and the IMF to meet tomorrow's challenges. So we know the major challenges. It's political fragmentation, climate change, financial and debt resource mobilization, demographics, artificial intelligence, and a number of topics. What will the impact of each of these subjects be? Will they be negative or positive in 20-25 years? And will are these institutions ready to face these situations? Depending on how they evolve, it can either be positive or negative, or we can be optimistic or pessimistic. But in any case, we will have to be prepared to meet future crises, and they may be on an unprecedented scale. That being said, it's important to see why a mid- and long-term exercise in planning for topics. So why do we have to do this now? Well, to simply take the question of demographics. We talk about the climate, we talk about debts, debt burdens, but not much about demographics. If you look at Africa, this is a continent whose population is going to be doubling in the next 25 years. 2.5 billion people, and over 70% of these people will be young people under 30 who will be living in cities. What kind of jobs will be created? What infrastructure will be able to welcome them? Where will they be housed? What will they eat? 1.2 billion people who are going to be on the job market, and we know that only 400 million will have difficulties with being inserted on the job market. Can we create 400 million jobs in the next 25 years? And if we can't, as Professor Rugoff is saying, well, are 400 million people going to stay hungry, waiting, just seeing a few kilometers away a very opulent Europe? This is a very important topic, and we can't just look at migration and little bits based on domestic policy preoccupations mostly. This is a major question, and it deserves our full attention. And we're only just now starting to look at what investment we need. And then there's the second topic, and that's the debt. We have to think about how we can manage the question of debt. In a number of countries, especially in Africa, are in a very ambiguous situation. We've already talked about this, but when you think in the mid and long term, are we trying to solve the problem of debt, or are we trying to ensure that we're not entering cyclic debt? That there's the current debt we'll solve, and then 10 years later we'll have a new form of debt that we're going to have to solve. No, the question is to solve the problem definitively so these economies can prosper. in the mid and long term. That's the true goal, but we realize that every time there's a debt crisis, which comes out of unforeseen consequences, internal or external shocks, everybody gets around the sickbed and tries to ensure that the person drowning comes out of the water and onto the riverbank, and then they're just left on the riverbank. But then we come back and they're in the water again. So we need mid and long-term solutions to say what these institutions have to do in the short term to bring indebted countries out of the difficult situation they're in. And what means and what investments do we need, what strategic sectors do we need to invest in so that prosperity and growth are inclusive and sustainable over the long term. So these are the topics we're working on. And for these institutions that we have in their own organization, in their procedures, their instruments, their financial resource mobilization, what should be done, what changes do we need to ensure that these institutions can face the challenges 20, 25 years from now. So that's currently what we're thinking about. And of course, this joins what you're doing within the 4P framework. And I think it's in these frameworks and these questions of governance will be managed. Is that enough? Well, somebody was saying earlier that maybe an additional seat on the board of the IMF for Africa, is that enough? Devoting 45% of their funding for climate change at the World Bank, is that enough? Should we do more? And that's the real topic. And like the minister from Spain was saying, this is a situation where everybody needs to heed this wake-up call. In 1944, when we created these institutions, they were created in a context of trauma coming out of the financial crisis of 1929 in the U.S. and the end of the World War, which was a tragedy for the entire world. And it was important to set up a stable international monetary institution to ensure shared and inclusive prosperity around the world. And this made it possible for countries to come up with a compromise to create multilateral institutions to manage these issues. Today, given the stakes we have to face now, have countries really understood how urgent our situation is? Are they fully aware that the climate, that debt are all such important topics that we cannot focus on petty national matters? We have to work multilaterally to find sustainable answers to these issues. If we're not aware of that, we're not aware of how urgent it is, we will continue to hold meeting after meeting, summit after summit. But we need solutions. But for that, we need some sort of major upheaval or major crisis so that people suddenly realize how urgent this is and that countries are ready to make the efforts they need. Thank you. Thank you very much for all of your work, and thank you for reminding us.
Necessary to also make the system fit for the challenges of the future, and thank you also for the reflection that you're making in terms of governance, and we really look forward to working on those issues with you at the 4P. So let me now turn to the Assistant Secretary Alexia Latortue from the U.S. Treasury. I'm delighted to have you here. You're also the 4P, the Sherpa to the 4P, so we're really keen on hearing what are some of the priorities that the U.S. has going to Seville, and how do you think we can leverage the 68 countries of the 4P to be working together and delivering in Seville? Thank you.
Merci beaucoup. Je suis ravie d'être de retour à Paris.
Thank you very much. I'm delighted to be back in Paris.
With Secretary Yellen last year in Paris for the summit and the start of the 4Ps. I also had the chance to be with Secretary Liu in 2015 in Addis Ababa, and we now have a whole of government approach with the U.S. government leading to Seville. I'd like to start by highlighting the importance of convergence. I hope you heard on this panel a lot of agreement on what the challenges are, but also the elements of solutions. And I think it's really important to bring together the work in New York with the Pact for the Future, with the SDG Summit, the work of the 4P, the work of emerging markets, Kenya and the Africa Climate Summit, and of course, Bridgetown 3.0. to really focus, as Prime Minister Mia Mottley often says, on the common ground and get on with it with the areas of agreement. That's my first point. My second point, having just come back from New York, meeting with the small island development states, with the Africa Group, with the successive emerging market G20 presidencies, which I think really helped to shape the agenda, India, Indonesia, Brazil, South Africa coming next. It's really important to increase communication around where we have achieved progress. And Commissioner Upalainen started by laying out some of this progress. And that's important not to congratulate ourselves, but rather to press the accelerator on the momentum and the areas of progress, which allows us to then understand the remaining gaps where we still need more solutions. Going to now the issue of Seville in more specificity, I would like to say that the Addis Ababa Action Agenda, the 7 pillars, absolutely remain relevant in our minds. The issue is implementation with urgency, as my Spanish colleague said, and also with scale. And there are a few areas of these pillars that we need to double down on. I'd like to start with something that has not come up a lot: domestic resource mobilization. That is the ultimate social contract between a government and its people if it has its own resources. And so we really need to step up this agenda that's not new, but we're not delivering enough on progressive tax systems, the human resources to then implement sound tax systems. Secondly, debt. We've spoken a lot about debt. And here I think we need to again double down on prevention. Why are we having these problems? How can we avoid them? Through sound public financial management, better understanding about the returns of investment, the different types of financing needed for the different investment needs of countries. Secondly, there's a whole host of countries that are not in need of debt restructuring, but that debt payments are crowding out important investments in the Sustainable Development Goals. The IMF and the World Bank, with strong support from the United States, has come up with a 3-pronged approach. It's on the website, so you can look for it. That talks about, number 1, the external financial system stepping up for these countries, increasing financing so that they have net financial positive flows, not net negative flows. And this involves the World Bank, the IMF, all the regional development banks, all the national development banks as well, stepping up with finance. Secondly, these countries putting in place structural reforms and really improving their work on domestic resource mobilization to be able to finance their development. And thirdly, finding innovative ways to help to reduce debt service payments, including, for example, through guarantee mechanisms, but also through debt for nature swaps. So that's debt. A third area that I think needs renewed attention is the science, technology, and innovation pillar of the Addis Ababa Action Agenda. There, innovations in technology have skyrocketed since 2015. Artificial intelligence was mentioned by Prime Minister Ashi. And here the challenge is to really be able to help countries not get deeper into a digital divide. To be able to, we know that technologies, artificial intelligence, can reduce the cost of development. It can broaden outreach, but there's also risks, cybersecurity, mis and disinformation. And so how do we enable countries to leverage these technologies, but could put guardrails so that they're used responsibly? I also want to focus on the pillar around private capital mobilization. We will always need official development assistance for certain things, but it will never suffice to help countries meet their development aspirations. And so we need to use the official sector, the public sector, to create the space for the private sector to come in. 5 priorities. Having targets for the official sector, for development banks, to really know that their jobs is to use their balance sheet and their expertise to help leverage in private sector. Secondly, better data around the recovery and default rates in emerging markets. The GEMS database is really important there. Thirdly, we need to have a more sophisticated palette of instruments to bring in the private sector. Guarantees, the World Bank Group is tripling its guarantee business, political risk insurance, local currency solutions. All of these are absolutely critical. Fourthly, good old-fashioned sound policy work. Sound macroeconomic financials is the best way to get private sector interested in countries. And then finally, project preparation. We need the bankable projects that will interest the private sector to come in. Let me close, because time is tight, on what has been spoken a lot about, which is the reform of the MDBs and also of the IMF. Secretary Yellen in late 2022 called for the evolution of the development banks in recognition that development is not linear. The climb up for progress is uphill, long and winding. But the tumble down to unraveling progress is very, very fast, as we saw during COVID. And so helping these institutions help countries be more resilient to face global challenges like climate, like pandemics, and like fragility, which we have not spoken enough about, is absolutely critical. We've seen the MDBs start to meet this challenge on a number of fronts, including increasing their financing capacity, the G20 estimates, by $360 billion over the next 10 years. The IMF also now has instruments with low finance, concessional financing for countries through the Poverty Growth and Reduction Fund. The US contributed $21 billion through the Resilience and Sustainability Trust Fund, and of course now reduced surcharges for countries, which is really critical. So let me end with a positive note for Seville. If we focus on convergence, if we focus on increased communication and understanding, and if we absolutely focus on implementation, actions with urgency and scale. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you for these great points. And let me hand over now to Mary Beth Goodman, who's the Deputy Secretary General at the OECD. The OECD is doing a wealth of fantastic work that can support Seville. So we look forward to hearing more about you on this.
Thank you so much. It's really a pleasure to be here, and I couldn't agree more with what the panelists before me have said. Let me give you a bit more detail on some of these options that we have for solutions and progress on the road to Seville. So the OECD has been actively working and contributing to, since its inception, to the 4Ps agenda, and have been really trying to propel this idea of co-creation, to have more innovation in policy solutions so that we can help bridge the SDG financing gap. Part of what we've done is to create something called the Total Support for Sustainable Development Framework. We're really looking at the data and how we measure initiatives. And as everything is created, if you don't have a good acronym, it will not survive. So we have created an acronym called TOSTI for this work, so that we can really effectively measure and monitor the SDG-related investments that go beyond official development assistance, that include the private resources mobilized through official means, such as the official guarantees we heard about, the credit lines, the concessional loans. All of this requires data to really measure the progress, and we are looking for more countries who want to be part of this TOSTI solution so that we have the data we need to generate outcomes in Seville. Another element we're working on is really helping to support the development through enhanced financial flows. As all of you are probably well aware, we have the Development Assistance Committee, which sits within the OECD to help monitor and create coordination among the official development assistance. We're trying to take a look at that ODA to see how we can use that to mobilize private finance, private investment. And we're doing this by looking at the value chain through a finance and investment perspective that will support advanced and enhanced mobilization. By looking at the upstream work, which is about strengthening the enabling environments we just heard about, as well as the downstream work that is looking at facilitating increased financial flows. So part of what we're doing on all of this is really looking at how we can tap into the vast pools of the commercial capital through the green, social, sustainability, nature-based debt swaps, and all of the sustainability-linked bonds to create more momentum around that, to help get more money into countries, as we've just heard, who really need to have a bridge now to address some of these climate financial issues. Another effort looking at global collaboration and initiatives. There is absolutely no way any one country is going to solve any of this on their own. These global challenges require global responses. So part of what we're doing to put action on this effort of a global response is with the backing of the G7 and African leaders, we have launched the Africa Virtual Investment Platform with the African Union. And this is to improve data and policies, improve the risk ratings, and mobilize greater investment on the continent. Another example, we're contributing to the 4 Ps effort that was launched here last year by President Macron around the Coalition for Coal Transition Accelerator. And to help countries develop the guidance they need for private financial institutions to finance the just transition away from coal. Another element I'll finance here. As we're building towards Seville, we're working on approaches that will ensure meaningful outcomes while being politically feasible. Having looked at all the data, we have decided to do a report that will be coming out very soon. It's our global outlook on financing for sustainable development in 2025, which is going to, I'll give away the headline now, it's going to advocate for an integrated approach that aligns climate and development financing. We have to start aligning these efforts so that we truly live up to this 4P principle that no country should have to choose between its own development and saving the planet. And that's exactly what countries are faced with right now. As we're heading towards Seville, we are very committed to helping achieve some of the positive outcomes. The objective of all of this gathering and all of the work that we do as we build to Seville has to be to generate the political momentum that is needed for an ambitious reform of the global financial architecture. We're faced with that now, and we cannot back down from that challenge. So while the expectations are high, I would argue that the stakes are even higher, and that we have to do all we can together to help build a better financial system that's capable of setting the world on a steadfast course towards meeting the SDGs. And the OECD and all of our resources are absolutely committed to working not just with our members, but with all countries to really help deliver on this outcome. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So thank you, all of you. Thank you so much for our speakers. I know we're short of time, but I just would like to end by saying that I think that this panel really showed that the imperative that motivated the creation of the 4P, so the imperative to reform the international financial architecture, is still a very strong priority. It's a shared priority, and that is something absolutely urgent to deliver on. And we do have an opportunity to move forward together. I think what La Tortue said about focusing on convergence is really aligned with the spirit of what the 4P does. We are aware of the differences, but we want to work together because we know that there are areas of convergence, and we can push this agenda forward together. So thank you so much, everyone, and have a great rest of the day. I also remind you that there is going to be now a very interesting panel on international taxation. So please stay on if you're interested. Thank you so much again to all of you.